How are you integrating AI in this entire ecosystem?
Ideas are dime a dozen.
Maybe there is a different way of looking at jobs.
There is nothing called a job satisfaction as such. A job is a job. It's not a living thing. Trust me, you will feel that horse is better where I put my money.
So, Rishi, we were talking about scale. What is the right time for a startup to go after the scale?
And when you do that, people revolt and revolt like crazy. If you are a leader, you have the ability to convert an ambiguous problem statement into a well-defined charter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Decoded Stories, where we explore the past, discuss the present, and prepare for the future with leaders. In today's episode, we are excited to introduce a tech leader in the realm of distributed systems and cloud services. As the Chief Technology Officer at HackerEarth, he has altered the landscape of technical assessments and competitive programming platforms through engineering and product leadership. His tenure as a career coach and a startup advisor showcases a profound journey of mentoring next-gen leaders. Please welcome Vishwastam Shukla. Thank you so much, Vishi, for coming today and for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm mostly twiddling my thumbs, so whenever you want to shoot it next, I'll be here.
Great, we'll do that then. Wonderful. So, Vishi, when we talk about Amazon, right, it is one of the companies which appears in most of the people's dream list, dream companies, right? Most of the people, they say that, my dream company is to join Amazon. And you started your journey with it. And that too at a stage where it was in the initial phase when they had started in India. And I believe around the same time, there were also startups that were being set up in India, right? So how was your journey with Amazon?
Yeah, so like you said, I mean, Amazon, the first encounter with Amazon was in 2006. And I was still in college, third year, I believe. And they were basically looking for some interns. And I happened to interview for one of the teams here. And, they liked whatever, they liked about me or my profile. They asked me to come up. And we were just three of us who were coming all the way from a college in Allahabad. We landed in Bangalore. And yeah, I think Amazon India at that point, you could say it was a startup on its own. We were about 20 odd folks.
Okay.
This was a very high talent density group, which I was really fortunate to work with early on. These were folks obviously from tier one colleges, but more importantly, they knew their craft very well. And unlike a lot of other companies who were hiring big numbers, Amazon probably used to hire, in low single digits at that point. The idea was obviously to grow, slowly initially, right? And so yeah, that's how Amazon happened for me. And back then there was no concept of I don't think anybody had heard of the term fintech. And what we were doing at Amazon India was actually payments back in 2006. Obviously, it was not for the Indian market. The market here was not as mature. But the product that we were working on was very forward-looking in a lot of ways. And, AWS was coming along. It was probably 3 years, 4 years into existence. Some of the early set of services that AWS had launched back then, EC2, S3, and these were slowly becoming popular. And this team of 20 engineers was basically working on a payments product under the AWS umbrella. That was quite unique because AWS was thought of as a infrastructure, sort of a cloud, service set of services, and payments somehow did not fit into that group. But because we were doing APIs for payments, somebody thought, okay, let it be within the AWS umbrella. So
what's an API?
Okay. So an API stands for Application Programming Interface. Anybody, any developer, any business which wants to, let's say, create an application, it could be a mobile application or a web application, has to have a front end and a back end. And typically this back end talks to the front end using what is called as the API. So you can consider this as an interface, a connector of sorts between the two components.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is as, vanilla definition that I can give you.
Yes.
I mean, there could be technical terms that I can use, but essentially that's what an API is. So we were building APIs to transfer money, right? And back then we had thought about a product, just to give you an example, we had thought about a product which would potentially transfer money from, let's say, Vishy to Rubinder and do it over a text message.
Okay.
Right. That time there was no WhatsApp. There's no none of those fancy things.
Yes.
There's no social network which was
Yeah.
popular. Probably very few. So you used to think of things which would work on SMS, right? And that was a very disruptive thought at that point because people used to think of payments as a big deal, right? Online payments as such were very low in percentage. People were still used to cash or check, or they would go to bank to do their transactions. So to think of that kind of a product at that stage was really disruptive as a thought itself. And then, of course, to actually go out and build it.
Okay.
Now, that's one part of it, which is the product. The other side of it was, you know, like we were discussing earlier, the scale, right? And if Amazon is trying to build something, it would think of Amazon scale and then build it out. Although the product that we were building was not supposed to directly integrate with Amazon e-commerce, which was, let's say, a giant gorilla size business. But the idea always is that if you're starting a new business within this Amazon umbrella or within the AWS umbrella, you would still want it to be able to scale to, let's say, tens of thousands of users concurrently, or maybe hundreds of thousands of users or transactions per day, that kind of a thing, right? So you always built for scale from day one, which, by the way, is not a good advice for a lot of startups, right? Startups should not do that. But at Amazon, you can afford to do that.
You can afford to. Got it.
Right? So that's the idea that that we started with. And of course, when we were working on it, that product was meant to be used in US. So we launched it in US, and it was an okay product in terms of adoption initially. It obviously slowly picked up there. And then we launched it. I was leading the team which launched this product in UK, and then we launched it in Germany. So in Europe geographies, I was basically directly heading that initiative within Amazon. And I think within the first few months of that launch, it was touted as one of the most successful launches within Amazon. So we did some good work, but there was a lot of technically challenging things that we had to deal with, not just in terms of scale, but also in terms of, hey, how do you even process data like credit cards? How do you store national identities, KYC? Because all of this was new back then. Right? Today, you can do your KYC within minutes.
Yes.
Right? You can just open up, fire up any app on your phone, and you can do the KYC on your phone or your tab. Back then, there was no such thing. Right? So how do you actually do it without all of these technologies at your disposal? So I think that made it very, very interesting. And of course, with payments come regulations.
Exactly. I was coming to that only.
So yeah, I think it was very, very interesting. And I think the initial, I would say the first couple of years itself, it was like a huge learning curve, very, very steep learning curve, both in terms of technology and in terms of domain. And there was so much inductive learning. Like you used to be with people who are like probably 5x smarter than you, or at least that's what you felt. Right? These are guys who have gone on to build some of the most successful startups in India, whether you look at Flipkart, or you look at Infibeam, or you look at any of those. All of those guys were there, and we were working very closely. And it actually did not matter how many hours you were putting in back then, because everyone was so driven, and everyone was so excited about their own craft that they were like, yeah, throw us more challenge and we are gonna solve for it.
And you were in the fintech team in an Amazon, or did you change teams also over there?
Yeah, so all the while I was at Amazon, I was working within the same team. Although what happens with bigger organizations is that there are these reorgs that happen. And we went through multiple reorgs ourselves.
Okay.
So initially, like I said, this payments thing was basically under the AWS umbrella. Then, somebody thought, okay, AWS is probably moving more and more towards computing infrastructure and cloud.
Okay.
So maybe payments does not make sense, which was the right call. So then payments was moved out of that. And then the question was, where do we put it, right? And then that's when it was decided that payments should be set up as a separate entity on its own. So
Okay.
it is even today a separate legal entity,
Okay.
right? So today what you use in India, right? If you use UPI through Amazon, or if you are paying through your credit card on Amazon, all of this is basically clubbed under a single separate entity.
Okay.
So that's a payments entity.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
been set up, yeah.
Got it.
And it's also for legal and compliance reasons that you want to set it up, because you don't want your e-commerce business or your cloud business to be dragged down by the compliances that you have for the payments business.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So things become a little bit more complex there. So you want to carve out a separate entity, let it grow, and let it solve for its own challenges.
And at that time, because you mentioned that the product that you were building, right, it was not for the Indian market, it was for the other market, right? Let's say US and UK also, you had launched it.
Yeah.
So how different were the compliances over there?
Yeah.
I believe for both of these two countries as well, right? If you look at it, there would be quite a huge change.
Correct. So even today, if you compare with how the payments scene in India looks today versus what is it in US versus what it looks like in Germany, it's chalk and cheese, right? Even developed markets have a lot of differences between them. So
Okay.
US is very, very heavy on credit cards, even till date, and it was back then as well, right? People love their credit cards. The concept of maxing out on your credit cards is so common, right? It may not be a very healthy practice, but
Yeah.
people are just used to it, right? And they're comfortable with taking more debt.
Yes.
As it's very cultural for them to kind of live on credit cards and whatnot. So we had to focus on credit cards as the main offering. When we looked at Germany, let's say, right, there is a concept of direct debit,
Okay.
which is basically like you're debiting your bank account, which is more like net banking sort of a thing for us, right?
Okay.
In India, initially when online commerce or e-commerce started, COD was very heavy, right?
Yeah.
Nobody trusted these platforms. Everybody wanted COD, right?
Yes.
Because you were not sure what is going to land at your doorstep, and whether you'd like it or not, or
Not.
whether you want to pay for it or not,
Yes.
whether it would get damaged, or whether you get a piece of brick instead of an iPhone, and those kind of things. We've heard about them, right? So COD was very popular in India initially, but slowly now you see India has taken that leap. And today it's all UPI.
Yes.
Wherever you look at it. And credit card is picking up, right? Everybody like you and me probably can afford a credit card, but I would say even now 80% of the people who are customers of e-commerce, right, in some way, some form or fashion, are still using UPI and COD.
COD.
Right?
Yes.
Credit card penetration is still very low, right? Because it cannot be approved for a lot of people. I'd say probably, if you look at the entire population of our country, probably 1% or maybe even less than 1% would have credit cards.
Would have credit.
Right.
Wow.
So we're not big on credit cards even now, and that was the difference back then as well. We were looking at COD in India. And by the way, by the time I was moving out, we were already working on the India product. So
Okay.
we were in the launching phase of the India business as well. So very, very different. Very different.
Since we're talking about this, is there any problem statement which is very close to your heart with respect to India that you would want to solve for, given you have all the resources, everything with you? So yeah.
Yeah. So it's not actually, ideas are dime a dozen, right? So I get a lot of ideas every day. I mean, if you and I said, we can probably come up with 20 ideas in 1 hour. So I think there are a lot of ideas. In fact, somebody had written about it that wherever you see a queue in India, that's a potential startup.
Okay.
Right? That's a very unique way to think about it, right?
Yeah.
If there's a queue for something, there's probably a startup that can solve it.
Wow.
Right? There's a business need.
There's a business need.
Right? You don't see queues in other geographies as much, unless it's for a new iPhone launch and whatnot, which I've never been able to make sense of. But essentially, if you go to, if you go back in time, we used to have queues for electricity bill payment, right? Now there is fintech solving that, right? You can pay your bill in like seconds, right? You used to have queues for cinema tickets. Somebody solved it, right? You used to have tickets for, queues for railway tickets. Somebody solved it. Flight tickets. Somebody solved it. Right? So wherever you can find a queue, there's a potential idea. That's one way to look at it. There are multiple ways to look at it. If you were to think of, let's say, B2B businesses, right? One way to look at it is, if I'm using an Excel sheet for something, there's probably a startup use case there. Anything which requires you to do a lot of work in Excel sheet, there's probably a use case
for that. And one thing you mentioned about the working hours, right? And I think it is quite a hot topic these days as well,
70 hours a week.
Exactly. I was coming to that. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a bit of a controversial thing. So thanks for putting me in this situation. But see, I think you should do what your work requires you to do. I think that's the first rule. Beyond that, I think it should all be about what is it that you are willing to put in, right? So if your work needs you to work 70 hours, 80 hours, there are founders who are working like 100 hours a week, right? That's absolutely fine, because that's what their job demands, right? So if Vishy's job requires him to work 50 hours a week one week, and then maybe 80 hours a week another week, that's just it. Because a lot of people tend to have this misconception about job satisfaction. Actually, this phrase should be thrown out of this dictionary, because there is nothing called a job satisfaction as such. A job is a job. It's not a living thing. It's basically defined that this is what any person who's doing or in this role is supposed to do, right? Which means whatever it entails, somebody has to do it. Now, if Vishy wants to apply for that job or basically take that job, Vishy has to be ready to do that job.
Absolutely.
If I'm not ready to do that job, I'm not the right fit. Maybe somebody else is. But for me, the job description won't change. Right? Maybe there are jobs which require you to work only 40 hours a week, and that's absolutely fine. If I'm okay with that, and if I'm okay with the progress that I'm making, if I get all my needs met by working 40 hours a day, maybe that's okay. So that's the first thing that you need to look at, which is, what does the job actually require you to do, right? If it requires 70 hours, well, you got to do 70 hours. If it requires 50 hours, if you can do the same work in 60 hours, great. Nothing like it, right? You take back your 10 hours. Then there is a question of, what can I do if I have some more time, right? Should I put in more time, like I was saying earlier? Should I put in more time again on the same job? Or if I can save, let's say, those 10 hours, should I do something else with it? Now, that's where all this, most of the noise comes from, right? Because no matter what anybody says, I don't think people are measuring 70 hours every day unless they are actually clocking their hours, which in services industry they do. But even there, it's the time from which they log into their systems or check into their office and then they move out. That's the time that they clock. But how effective is that? We all know. I mean, it's very hard to to figure out whether a person is just browsing social network or actually doing some work, right? So that number is irrelevant. So 70 hours is irrelevant. What is relevant is, what does your job actually need you to do? If you're doing that now in 50 hours, 40 hours, 80 hours, that's fine, right? Beyond that, you have your own time. Now, that's where a lot of young engineers especially are told about, hey, do this on the side. There's this hustle that you can do, all of those things, making, some extra bucks. All of those things. Now, that's a culture which I don't necessarily subscribe to. Again, because that's being promoted because people think that they can extract more out of their hours, right? And they can extract more value out of the work. Now, that is fine, but only up till a point. If you're not enjoying those hours, if you're doing that for some extra pocket income or whatever, that's not going to last.
Yeah.
You're not going to like it. You may do it for few months, few years, but you're going to burn out. So that additional, whether it is 2 hours, 1 hour a day, or 10 hours a week, or 20 hours a week, whatever time you have, spend it on things that you actually love to do. And it may not necessarily be related to tech, it may not be necessarily related to your work, it could be anything.
Anything, yeah.
Right? Like I said, you called me over a weekend, I was just twiddling thumbs, I was not doing anything.
Since we're talking about this, do you believe this entire concept of, having, let's say, multiple streams of income, I would say, is coming from the Western world? The reason why I'm saying is, why I'm asking you this, because let's say you open any of the social media channel, right? You would get to see these videos. Let's say you have your 9 to 5 job, but you have, you're doing something on the side by side as well, right? But my question is always that, if a person actually goes for that, then you're actually not getting time for yourself, right? And it can be mentally also you can burn out a lot, right? So do you believe this entire concept is coming from the Western world because maybe there is a different way of looking at jobs?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's necessarily coming from the Western world as such, but I think there is a lot of latent need for making more money, right? People, of course, feel that more money is good, right? And that's what is driving all this, right? Now, the question is, if I'm able to successfully do 2 things or 3 things in parallel, and I'm not burning myself out, and I'm also liking whatever I'm doing, by all means, go ahead and do it, right? But if you're not liking it and you're doing it probably for, a little bit of extra income, maybe there's a strong need that is pushing you there, right? Because if it is not, then you have to question yourself, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, there are some people who write blogs, right? Now, at some point, they may start making money out of it. Some people do vlogging, right?
Yeah.
They start making money out of it after some point, right? But if you ask them, is that a craft that they love, right? Maybe that's where you will see a divergence. Only a handful of them will probably love it, right?
Yes.
And eventually they will figure out, hey, I've been burning myself out over these years, and I've made some money also, but it's not something that I'd want to continue. So, when I question myself, or when I talk to some of these engineers who question me on these lines, I tell them, look, do something in your free time which you would love to do even 5 years, 10 years down the line, if you can figure out something like that. If you can't, that's fine. You go do whatever. Maybe you'll find something by doing, and that's all right, right? But don't burn yourself out just to sort of do something because there are 10 others who are doing it, right? Do it because you would want to do it and you see value in it. And if you don't see value in it, you shut down and do something else, right?
So, Vishy, coming back to your journey, you have shifted domains as well, right? From an e-commerce, or should I say fintech, right? You moved to transportation management, then you moved to media tech and to HR tech. So when someone is shifting domains, there is obviously a change of users as well. Your end customers also change.
Absolutely.
Right? So how do you cope with these domain changes, especially from a tech aspect?
No, that's a very good point, actually. So what happens is, it's not just domains which are changing. Like you said, the user persona also changes. Sometimes the user is the customer. Sometimes customer is somebody else and user is somebody else.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So the person who's paying you is different from the person who's actually using your product 90% of the times, right?
Yes.
So there is a lot of change when you switch, domains. I'll give you an example. So after I moved out from Amazon, I joined Move in Sync, and like you said, it was into transportation management. And at that point, there was no concept of managing transport for companies. There's nothing like that, at least in India. Even abroad, very few use cases here and there. And the biggest change for me was that our product was being used by people like drivers, people who were, who were probably barely educated in the sense that they were probably 10th grade or 12th grade. Sometimes they might have studied more, but most of these guys are not really tech savvy at times. They are not very, let's say, good at communicating their problems at times. Of course, you can't, in India at least, you can't expect everyone to speak English as well. So they can tell you their problems in whatever language they speak, which is their native language. But that was a very huge shift, right? And very interesting set of things happen when you deal with different customer persona. I was working in the US, and even while I was in India, I was working with customers who were based out of, who were basically like websites operating out of US, Germany, UK. My stakeholders would involve people from all over, these developed nations. And the kind of conversations, nature of conversations was very different. And hence, actually focusing on technology becomes easier because you don't have the overhead of bridging that communication gap or the understanding of technology which these folks have. When you come to something like what we did at MoveInsync, we had that twofold challenge, right? Making people understand and use technology, and secondly, communicating with them, right? It was a huge challenge. I remember there were instances when because this was a disruptive thing that we were working on, and there was a huge amount of inefficiency, if I can put it politely, in the system. Because imagine a corporate in India which has offices across cities. There are tens of thousands of employees commuting between office and home every day, which means there are hundreds and hundreds of vehicles that they use every day, which means and there is a dependency which is very critical, because if you don't have vehicles available at the right time and so on, they are either not able to reach office and clock their work hours, or they're not able to go back home on time, and there are safety, security concerns and whatnot. When you're dealing with those kind of people, the technology has to, the communication part of it has to be baked into the product. It has to be so self-served, right? To an extent that somebody who's barely educated can actually use your product, right? And that's the challenge, right? So we used to have instances where these people would not like interacting with technology because not only was it hard for them to use tech, but it was also hitting their pockets. They were basically somehow doing ghost trips, what we used to call them. Essentially there is no employee traveling, and the cab guy would still bill you for it, right? Or not the individual cab guy, but basically an agency who's running cab would bill you for it. And the organizations did not have any way of figuring that out, because it was all offline. You could write whatever comes to your mind on that register and say that this cab went from A to B, and it went to pick XYZ employee, and it came back because the employee didn't show up. Now, there is no way to prove it unless you chase after all of those employees. How do you record that? And so it was hitting them in two ways. Not only was it actually asking them to use tech, but also hitting their pockets. And when you do that, people revolt. And revolt like crazy. So we used to have escalations like, hey, XYZ, there's a big banking, international banking MNC. They were using our setup in Kolkata, and they had a huge protest. Those probably 50 to 100 drivers actually blocked the highway. Right? That is what is possible if you do disruption in a domain like this.
Wow.
So your technology has not only to be scalable and usable, but it has to be able to communicate the right thing and give them the right message, and all of that has to be baked into the product. So that's what makes it interesting.
Wow.
It could even be things like we had an escalation where some 300 odd guys from a late night shift in an IT services firm was stranded because our system was down.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
And this was still early days. We were also, learning a lot of things, and our system was down. The cab drivers were not present to, take all those people home. So then, we had to firefight and handle those things. But that's what technology can do. And it's been some time since I left Movinsing. It's grown like crazy.
Yeah.
Now, when I joined them, it was, I think, 5 or 8 people, right? Company. Today it's 800, possibly 1,000. They move several 100,000 people every day. Now, it's all underneath. You don't want anybody to even notice what they're doing, because noticing means there has been an event, and typically that event is not happy.
Not happy, yeah.
So technology has to come into play without disrupting, while you are actually disrupting, without making them feel that they're being disrupted. There are a lot of issues. For instance, there are cities where you have huge cantonment areas. It's a very interesting use case, right? And cantonment areas typically do not have very good mobile network coverage.
Yeah.
Now you lose connectivity from the cabs, because we depend on the cab device to be able to track it and whatnot. And because of that, the number of kilometers that get clogged, which have to be billed, and basically you have to pay the driver for that, you don't clock that, because you're dependent on that Android device or whatever device that you put in.
Yeah.
Now, drivers don't like it, obviously, right? There could even be cases where you're driving under a flyover, and sometimes, your GPS starts acting funny. Sometimes it's not able to latch. You might have noticed it,
Yes.
personal car. And, it could be even a difference of, say, 1 kilometer in the entire thing. But because you're using technology, you can't say that, hey, I won't pay you for that 1 kilometer. How do you solve for that? That becomes very interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So again, domain, defines a lot of these challenges, and it's all technical. So instead of relying on, let's say, your regular GPS data, we fall back to something called triangulation.
Okay. What's that?
So triangulation is like you use the regular mobile tower signals, and you find maybe 3 nearby towers from which the mobile device was able to latch.
Okay.
Right? That's how you make a call.
Okay.
Your signals basically go to a mobile tower, right? So if you find 2 or 3 such towers, you use those 3 locations to triangulate to actually figure out what was the location. Even if you don't have GPS working on your phone, you can still get the location. You might have seen it in movies where they investigate things like, hey, this call was made from this area.
Yeah.
They don't depend on GPS. They depend on triangulation.
I used to have this question, honestly, while watching such movies.
So you can read up more on triangulation, but that's how it works.
Okay.
So you have to have those fallbacks in place. Otherwise, the system is not going to work, right? And these things happen very frequently. I can bet that if you drive from, let's say, this place, which is in Bilandur, to maybe MG Road, you might be crossing HAL. Right? Around HAL, this cantonment area, you might lose GPS for a bit. And I can bet the number of kilometers that your car odometer shows versus what you clock on GPS might be different.
Oh, okay.
Right. So solving for those things becomes very interesting.
Wow.
So that was, Movinsing. Then, I had a brief, period of work with Pub Ninja, where people are basically building apps initially for social network. I don't know if you remember, but Facebook used to have a lot of apps where people used to play games, or they used to take quizzes.
Yes.
It would sound very silly, where some quiz would pop up and they'll say, okay, we will rate your IQ if you select the right options and whatnot.
Yeah.
Some similar stuff, right? You would not believe that a huge percentage of US population was actually some way or the other using Pub Ninja apps.
Oh.
Right? And this startup with just 15 odd people had grown like crazy in a matter of few months. And all because a couple of their apps became super viral in the US. And they were actually literally printing money.
Okay.
Right?
So people had to download the Pub Ninja?
No, you can just directly play on Facebook.
Okay, just like that.
Back
so you
then,
don't have to download anything?
No,
okay.
nothing. Right? So it's all embedded within Facebook. You could just play the game right there, or take the quiz from there. And a couple of these apps became very, very popular, and they went viral. And lo and behold, a small startup, which is still trying to figure out things, suddenly, has a lot of revenue and profits at hand. But, like it's always the case with virality, there is no formula. You never know what is going to work,
Absolutely.
right? So a couple of these things worked, and companies suddenly started to take it more seriously. And when I talked to the founders, they were very young founders, and they were like, we have data for, let's say, 100 million folks in the US, which was a big deal. US population itself is not that big. So having a 100 million user base in the US was huge. So I was surprised by that. And then they said, we know that they like to play our games, but obviously this is not very sustainable as a business model. We'd like to use this data and try to build something on top of it, right? That's when we started having deeper conversations. And back then, this AI wave was not there. This we're talking about 2017, 18. So we said, okay, we can build some sort of a recommendation engine using whatever data we have, and try and see if we can recommend them other content, right? So we said, okay, let's build content, and using the user data we have, we may be able to recommend some stuff to them, and let's see how that goes.
Okay.
It was going okay, right? I won't say it was anything went viral or it was a huge hit. It was going just fine. The revenues were okay. We were making ad revenues from everything that we published, and we had set up a publishing team which would basically publish content on all popular topics in US and UK. Things like what is the royal family up to, and what is the US Hollywood up to, and what are the NBA stars up to, and all of this was being done sitting in India. So we created tools using which they could basically track all the news items within seconds of things happening, right? Whether it was coming through Twitter or sourced through agencies and whatnot. So we created integrations for that.
Okay.
And we were kind of trying to scale that. The the entire thing came to a screeching halt at the point when Facebook, basically experienced this whole Cambridge Analytica fiasco, which was basically like people figured out that Facebook data was being used to influence, people politically, and elections were being influenced and whatnot, and Facebook data was being outsourced.
Outsourced, yeah.
Right. So that's when Facebook actually hit hard on all the access that any company had on Facebook user data.
Okay.
So whatever inflow that we had in terms of user data and user profile, we had that more. And I think that's where we decided, okay, this strategy is not going to work. Then by that time, we had grown the content business to an extent that we were interacting with a lot of US and UK based influencers. And these were guys who were doing blogging on their own sites, or they were doing blogging on some third party sites, and they were basically making money using their own content. And we had figured out a model that if we have built an ad tech sort of piece for our own content, maybe that's something that we can share it with these guys and make it a B2B sort of a model. So whatever ad tech we built in-house, we started sharing it with them, and the entire thing went from B2C to B2B sort of a thing.
Okay.
But it wasn't as exciting as the earlier thing was. So that's why the whole thing was not we didn't carry it forward. So yeah, that was the content piece and the media tech part of it. Again, very different set of users, drastically different from dealing with drivers in Kolkata and Pune and Chinchwad and all of those remote places in India, and to users in US and whatnot. So again, talking about and dealing with news related to US UK royal family and whatnot. So very, very different,
Very
right?
different, yeah.
And you just have to adapt yourself to
Yes.
to all these use cases. Whatever again goes back to what the job description requires you to do.
And coming to HackerEarth.
Yeah. So HackerEarth, obviously, still there. And it's been an absolute fun ride so far. Just completed 5 years there.
Yeah.
I think that's something which was actually close to what I wanted to do eventually, in life as well, which is directly impacting developers and their journeys job prospects, opportunities. We have a mission, at HackerEarth to be able to match the developers with the right, opportunities globally, right? So that's what, created that pull. And of course, the founders that were there, I talked to them again, young founders, very super energetic and super enthused about what they were doing, which is what you need, by the way. And once I talked to them, in fact, I talked to them over maybe a period of 12 months before finally taking a call.
Okay.
So it took some time, but when I was convinced, I was like, okay, let's go ahead and do this. Joined them as VP of engineering, and I think this journey has been, exciting. It's been, pretty much like a roller coaster, right? So when I joined, there were different set of problems that were thrown at me, and both in terms of technology, people, because I started out with the engineering, engineering charter. Today, in 5 years, I look at engineering, I look at a content team. I also sort of look at a few other things where I feel I can add more value
Okay.
within the organization. And of course, this journey has all been about taking one problem at a time, solving it, moving on to the other problem, solving it, moving on to the other problem, and solving it. And typically, what happens is, if you are a high agency individual, or you believe in being somebody who's a high agency individual, you almost always find new problems to solve, right? So when I joined, like I said, engineering itself had a bunch of things to be solved for. Product stability, availability, scaling, all of those things were, of course, the top priority. And then the team, right? Shaping them up, grooming them, creating leaders from within, and hiring obviously fresh talent. I think those were some of the things that I initially focused on, and more from just to sort of go deeper into the tech side of things. I think the stability and availability, like I said, were the big things, and the product at back then was probably not as well shaped. And when we started working on it, we identified, okay, let's look at maybe 2 or 3 North Star metrics that we can focus on. So we said, okay, what is the current availability of the product? Is it 2 nines, 3 nines, 4 nines, whatever? So we started out somewhere around maybe 2 nines or slightly below that. And then we took this 24-month journey, or probably slightly longer, and we reached to 4 nines. And after 4 nines, we said, okay, this is good enough, right? This is like industry standard, that anybody else in the industry would offer or would love to offer, and our customers were okay with it. So we kind of, worked on it piece by piece, one thing at a time, one component at a time. Whether it is improving latencies for certain APIs, again APIs,
Yeah.
or fixing the scale that the database could handle, or fixing the front end because it was fragile and it was written in vanilla JavaScript, which was not working out very well for the team. So
Okay.
all of those things, one thing at a time. And sometimes people ask me, what is that one thing that you did? There's no one answer, unfortunately, right? There's no magic bullet that you do this and your availability will improve from 99
Yeah.
to 99.99. And the other thing about this is, going from 2 nines to 3 nines is tough, but going from 3 nines to 4 nines is like tough multiplied by x, 10 or 100, whatever, 100 times.
Okay.
So I think that's another challenge that you face. But beyond that, it's a call. So we said, okay, maybe 4 nines is good enough. We leave it there. Right? It's not like we don't monitor that. Today we still monitor it. Most of the weeks, most of the months, we are at 100%. So today that is no more a problem that we have to solve.
Okay.
But those are the kind of things that we started picking up one by one, and slowly started working on it. So I think initial, I would say 1.5 to 2 years were entirely focused on the engineering side of things, heads down, fixing things with the product and the stability. One of the other things that we worked on again was how much scale can we handle, right? So we get customers today who want to, let's say, assess or screen, 5,000 candidates in one test in one go. So we are okay with that, right? It's, nobody even cares about a 5,000 concurrent candidate sort of event anymore. Back then we used to, right? We interacted with customers who were operating at even bigger scale. Some customers would say, hey, for instance, one of the big search companies who's our customer, they would say, okay, we want to assess 25,000 candidates over a weekend. Now, that's a bit of a challenge. It's a good challenge to have as an engineering leader. So we started creating systems which could handle that kind of scale, right? Then we moved on. One of the IT services, big IT services companies came and said, hey, we want to assess 50,000 candidates in an hour.
Okay.
All of them concurrently attempting a test.
So when you say assess, is it like, let's say there is a live test which is happening?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's like a live test. There's a set of questions. These could be coding questions. These could be, MCQs. This
Okay.
could also be questions like create a small application which has this backend, this front end, and which does this functionality. So you can do all. Maybe there are questions related to SQL. There are questions related to how would you train a data science model, right? So creating a data science model, again, all of that encapsulated within a test of maybe 1 hour or 2 hours, whatever, right? So different types of questions, right? The idea is that none of these companies would want to interview 10,000 candidates, right? Now imagine a problem, say, for instance, Google, right? If they want to hire, say, 100 or 500 interns globally, right? To hire 500 interns globally, uh, one way is to interview all these 500 candidates, maybe 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 4 5 interviews, whatever
Yes.
Google is known for, right? They'll do that. The other way is you put them through this assessment and cut your interviewing hours by half at least, right? So you do only 2 interviews or maybe even 1 interview, right? So that's one direct benefit that they get. The other is to hire 500 odd interns, they would probably have to look at 25,000 resumes,
Absolutely.
right? Because they have, 1 or 2% conversion. And there are companies which have stopped looking at college pedigrees and college degrees and whatnot. There is no concept, fortunately for these companies, where they say, I only hire from tier 1 or
Tier
tier
one,
2
yeah.
or whatever else. These companies are pretty clear. Anybody having the skill set is good for us,
Yeah.
right?
It actually removes that biasness.
It absolutely removes the bias. They don't, for all you know, they don't even know the name. There is something called blind assessments,
Okay.
where companies don't even know who's taking the assessment. They just know some person took it and this is the score,
Okay.
which means we have to interview them. And at that point, you actually get to know the person.
Oh.
Now that's amazing, right?
Yes.
But coming back to the scale, now if you have to assess 25,000 people or interview them, first of all, you'll have to sift through all those resumes.
Yes.
Imagine the number of hours that the manpower that it requires.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that, right? And if you use a platform like HackerEarth, you don't have to care about those 25,000 resumes, right? All you have to do is just send out an invite to those emails
Okay.
of all the candidates. And within a matter of 2 hours, you will know who are the top 5,000 candidates out of the 25, or the top 1,000 or the top 500, whatever, wherever you want to put the cutoff, right? 2 hours.
Yeah. And it's all done. You have the shortlisting with you.
You have the shortlists. Right? So that's the power, right? And if you're able to do this at scale, which basically ties back to the problem that I was telling you about, in engineering, we have to solve for scale.
Yeah.
This is the scale that we were talking about. And if you can do that, it certainly opens the opportunities for much, much bigger, customers. So like I said, IT services firm, they want to do 50,000 candidates in parallel. And typically they would hire maybe 10,000, 20,000 in a season. But to hire 10, 20,000, they are talking about lakhs of candidates, hundreds of thousands of candidates assessed and interviewed every season.
Yeah.
Now, if you can reduce that bandwidth to 25% of that original hours, that's a huge saving for them.
Yes.
Right? Immense value add. So that's what we do. Right? That's what assessments are all about. And if you can handle that scale, because they came to us after having somehow burned their hands with some other platform provider. If you're unable to handle that, then it kind of, you obviously lose trust with the customer. And the other thing is, you know that beyond a point you're not able to scale, which means your opportunities are restricted, right? Today, because we're able to handle scale, we are in conversations with not just companies but even governments,
Okay.
state governments, and even governments in countries like Canada and stuff. And these guys have government programs going on, and the scale is crazy, right?
Okay.
One of the state governments in India wants to assess 3 lakh candidates. I imagine when, and this is a true problem. Like I said, this is that queue that we were
Yeah.
talking about initially, right?
Yes.
There are only a handful of jobs, right? There are probably 10,000 jobs every season or 20,000. The market is bad these days, so probably lesser. So how do you ensure that the deserving ones actually even get a shot at it,
Yeah.
right? That's where the technology and the product comes in.
Is it only for for the engineers or the people in tech, data science, and all, or is it also open for the other functions in a company as well?
Yes, that's actually a very interesting space. So while the product was envisioned to operate only for developers and tech hiring,
Okay.
we found customers using it for other use cases as well,
Okay.
right? On their own.
Okay.
Basically, we give them the product access and they are able to figure out how to use it. So for instance, today there are customers who are using it for stuff like product managers, project management roles.
Okay.
We If you're talking about MCQs, you can pretty much give it to anybody.
Yeah.
So it could be a logical reasoning sort of a test that you can give for any position whatsoever, right? You're just checking for logical reasoning,
Yes.
right? So it's open for everyone. The product today is even capable of auto evaluating something like an essay type question,
Okay.
right? So you can go wild with it. Basically, any person whom you are hiring, even if it's a non-technical person, if you ask them to write a subjective answer, right? It could be a case study, it could be a pitch, it could be a marketing pitch, it could be a blog on a topic, it could be an essay on something, right? And you want to assess 50, 100 candidates, unless you go through each and every blog or the content that they write, you'll not be able to do it.
Yeah.
But the platform today can auto-evaluate all of that,
Wow.
right? And within maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of the time that they take the test, you have all the results available. And basically, under the hood, we are using an AI engine which kind of evaluates all of this. So customers have figured out other use cases. We just created it for the tech jobs, but looks like we can use it for whatever else, right? And typically they start with these kind of roles: product management, project management, marketing, digital marketing use cases, those kind of things.
Okay. And how are you integrating AI in this entire ecosystem?
AI, there's a lot of talk about AI and how people are building AI products or AI first product or AI driven product. Now, there's obviously you have to be able to cut through that noise and understand where the real use is. And we don't necessarily tom about our product using AI. But if I were to give you a list, it's probably going to be about at least 20 different product features where AI works under the hood.
Okay.
And users don't even possibly know that it's happening through AI.
Okay.
So one of the examples I just gave you, which is evaluating these subjective questions, right? The other thing is, let's say if you have a technical, test where the candidates are supposed to write code, right? Now, of course, the platform evaluates that code. That's not AI, right?
Okay.
You can get the scores. But let's say you shortlist 50 odd candidates in maybe 500, right? Whatever number took the test, but let's say you shortlist 50 basis their scores. Now, somebody still has to go through those 50 code pieces, right? The programs that candidates wrote. Now, if you go through the code, you have to be sharp enough to be able to read through what the code is actually trying to do.
Yeah.
Now that is a non-trivial cognitive load, right? It takes time. So what we do is we use AI to actually auto-generate explanations for the code in natural language.
Okay.
Right? So it says, hey, this piece of code is trying to do this.
Okay.
That piece of code is trying to do that. Right? So we basically contextualize the entire thing in natural language, and that makes it easier for the manual evaluator to go through those pieces of code. So that's another example, right? I put out this tweet recently. The biggest problem that most of the corporates are facing during campus hiring in India, unfortunately, is cheating. Right? Now, again, it's not a very happy thing to talk about, but it is a very real problem. Right? Again, there are obviously candidates who don't do that, but there's a large number of candidates who would indulge in something like this. How do you weed that out? How do you even catch that? Right? So we have AI to kind of handle various elements of that.
Okay.
Right? For instance, when they take the test, we mandate that they have to switch on the webcam. The moment they switch on the webcam, we regularly take their snapshots.
Okay.
Right. So for instance, if I'm sitting and taking a test in front of my computer and I, basically open my mobile and try to look at something, the system will catch it.
Okay.
System will say, okay, this guy's handling, basically holding a mobile, and potentially there is some issue,
Some
right?
issue, yeah.
It could be that somebody is sitting next to me. System will detect that there are multiple people in front of the webcam.
Okay.
It could be that I'm taking a test, but I stepped out for a while and looked up something, came back.
Yeah.
System will flag that.
Will flag that. Okay.
It could even be as simple as I have another monitor set up here, and I'm just looking towards that, and then I'm coming back to the screen and attempting it. System would catch that. So even your eyeball movement
Moments as well.
is actually being tracked. And now we would not want to ideally invest in this, but this is a problem that we have to solve. So we solve. So all of this is being done through AI.
Okay.
Right? Tons of places, but all of this is under the hood, because if I tell you, hey Ruby, you know what, there's AI here, we don't want you to be excited about the AI.
Yeah.
We want to care about the experience that you get while solving the problem that you have at your hand, right? So your problem is, I should be able to filter out the most eligible candidates out of my pool. Right? And if my system can do it transparently, intelligently, without having to have my customer or my user do a lot of work, that's a victory.
So, Vishy, if we look at your journey, you have transitioned into the leadership roles, right? From coding to calling the shots, you have made quite a leap, I would say. So, what skills do you believe are essential for an engineer to become an effective leader?
So I think, first of all, how I define a leader, right? So leader is somebody who moves from being an agent to being a principal.
Okay.
Being an agent means that, let's say I'm the founder, right, of a company. I hire an employee or a contractor or a consultant to do that job, to do a specific job for me. That consultant or that other person or an employee becomes an agent for me. I am the principal because I define the problem and I own the problem statement, right? Journey to lead, becoming a leader is a journey from being an agent to being a principal, where you own the problem statement.
Okay.
Right? When you don't feel like, hey, this is more like I'm asked to do it and hence I have to do it. You should basically feel that, hey, this is a problem that exists and I'm the right person, I'm the best person to solve it, hence I'm solving it.
Okay.
Not because your manager asked you to do something, right? So that's one mindset that you have to have, sort of a journey that you have to go through. And it's not like anybody is 100% principal or 100% agent, but you have to move towards that direction. So that's one. The next thing that, a good leader requires, and again, it has nothing to do with whether you manage people or not. You can be a leader even if you're working as an individual contributor, right? But if you are a leader, right, other than the ownership and acting as a principal, the other thing that it requires is handling ambiguity, right? Because if you are able to take an ambiguous problem statement and still solve for it, it shows a certain character, it shows a certain maturity, it shows a certain skill set, right? If you're not a leader, you're most likely dependent on somebody to define the tasks and the job for you. Right? Whereas as a leader, for instance, if I tell you, you know what, to be your job, or I have this problem statement, right, that we need to create a business in this space. That's a very, very high level ambiguous problem statement, right? Or let's say if I'm working at HackerEarth and I have a discussion with my CEO and he says, hey, we need to have some offering in the sourcing space. We've been doing assessments and whatnot. Let's have an offering in the sourcing space. Now, if you're not a leader, that's not enough for you. You want more directions. You want more specific action items, right? Whereas if you're a leader, you have the ability to, you know, sort of drill down into that ambiguity and convert an ambiguous problem statement into a well-defined charter, right? So that's another skill that you need, and you have to build it over time. Some people are very uncomfortable with that, especially early on in their careers. They're like, I don't know what you're talking. What am I supposed to do if you're telling me, you know, do it, let's solve for sourcing. What does it even mean? What code do I write to solve for that, right? So they struggle with it. In fact, a lot of senior engineers, even staff principal level engineers sometimes struggle with it because they are unable to think about ambiguities. And ambiguity essentially means there are unknowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns, right? So known unknowns are like, I know this will take some, let's say, cloud infrastructure to deploy, but I don't know how much it will cost me. That's a known unknown. Unknown unknowns are things that you don't even know about. COVID hit you, now what? That's an unknown unknown. That's a black swan. So you can't plan for that. And yet, if you can handle it, you're possibly, you know, good at solving for ambiguity. So that's the second thing. The third thing is judgment, right? As a leader, if you can be repeatedly demonstrating that you are good at judgment, that's a very, very highly valued skill that you can basically have. Now, judgment, and as a leader, it's essentially two things that you end up doing. One is information gathering, and the other is decision making, right? You 90% of your times, whatever you are doing, either it can be classified as information gathering or it is classified as decision making. You're not doing anything else. Most of the times.
Yes.
Right? So if you think of it like that, and information gathering is something that most of the people can do. Decision making, while they can do, can you be good at it? Right? And unfortunately, it's not something which can be measured very easily, right? It takes time and experience to go back, revisit all those decisions that you took, and then evaluate yourself whether that was the right decision or not. So in hindsight, you're able to do that. But when, let's say, you take a decision about your business today, you may not know how is it going to pan out. So you may base it on the information that you have today. You may base it on your intuition, your gut feel, your capability. It may or may not pan out. But that one decision is not good enough to rate yourself as a good decision maker or not. You will have to look at a series of judgments that you make over a period of time. So that's judgment. And maybe the last thing is storytelling.
Storytelling, yes.
Now, that's again something that I coach a lot of engineering managers and you know, director level hires and whatnot. I think a lot of people, especially from engineering background, you know, they tend to think that if I have the data for something, then I can convince the other party. And that convincing could be, let's say, as a director of engineering, or VP of engineering, you're talking to your product counterpart, you're talking to your sales counterpart, you're talking to your CEO, you're talking to your board, right? And that's basically how they feel, that if they have the right data, they can convince these guys, right? Unfortunately, that's not a lot of skill. That's the easiest thing to do. Right? That's the easiest. If I have all the data with me to prove what I'm trying to get at, it's a very easy job.
Yeah.
Nobody needs a lot of skill for that. I just have to gather the information, but the decision making is not there. The decision, once you look at the data, decision kind of becomes automatic. What happens when you don't have data? Can you influence people then? Right? If you, let's say, as a entrepreneur today want to go and raise funds, you may have data, you may not have data, but if you're still successful in raising funds, you would probably need a lot of storytelling.
Yeah.
Right? And storytelling is not all faff in thin air, but essentially you have to be able to convince and influence the other party, even if you don't have the data. And a lot of people can't make sense of it. How do you even do that if you don't have data?
Yes.
Right? It's very difficult. Now, the example that I give them, and there are countless examples, right? But if you gave a grocery list to somebody like a Morgan Freeman, he might read out that grocery list and make you cry. That is storytelling.
That is storytelling.
If you and I read that grocery list, we'll not make any sense out of it. We will not be able to evoke emotions.
Yeah.
Right? But that guy can read a grocery list and make you cry. Steven Spielberg, known for his movies and whatnot, once said that the superpower that I have is that at the exact same moment of time, I can make hundreds of people sitting in a cinema hall feel the exact same emotion.
Yeah.
People don't realize it, but that's a superpower.
Yes.
Right? And it is power of storytelling. Right? There is a guy who said that, you know what, I want to send human beings to Mars. Right? Is there any data to back it up? Zero.
Yeah.
No human being has ever been to any other planet. Forget about being to another planet. Nothing like that has even been attempted so far.
Yeah.
Right? There is no data to back him. There is no data which conclusively proves that actually that can be done. Even scientific research today, there is nothing that backs it. And yet, the guy goes on and raises billions of dollars to work on that idea. That is storytelling.
That is storytelling. Wow.
Right? You don't need, and if you need data for influencing somebody, that's just half the job. That's good skill, but that's just information gathering and automatic decision making. The real influence and the real skill is actually in convincing when you don't have data. Right?
Yeah.
So that is, if you can attain that skill, and I don't have that skill today, I'm also working on it. But if you can attain that skill, that's a superpower. So that's what leaders probably got to do.
During this journey, or maybe let's say if we talk about your journey as well, I'm sure you would have worked with great leaders who would have taught you multiple valuable things and would have also helped you become a better leader.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So as a mentor yourself, what is that one piece of advice that you find yourself sharing most often with the tech professionals?
I mean, there are horses for courses. So, I mean, people have different problems. So, I share different things. But when it comes to mentorship, I think the first thing that people who talk to me realize, and I tell them, is that a lot of engineers feel that you don't need mentors. Right? Now, it's a very naive thought, because even, I mean, I'm also learning, right? This learning never stops. I have multiple mentors. I talk to them at different occasions for different problem statements and whatnot. If you think about it, the biggest of stars, sports stars, you might be as skilled as a Virat Kohli, but you still need a coach.
Yeah.
How is that possible? Are you saying that you are so skilled at your job that you are better than Virat Kohli and you don't need a mentor? Most likely the answer is no. The thing that has happened is people haven't talked about it enough in other arenas. Somehow, this coaching is sort of been restricted to sports. Even in arts, people have managers and people like those who manage careers of these stars and whatnot in entertainment industry. In rest of the job profiles, somehow that concept has not flowed in, and I find it very surprising as to why and how that has happened over years. But it's not possible that you know everything about what you're doing, right? It's humanly not possible. And it's okay if you want to learn from books, you don't have a real life mentor, that is also fine. But you have to have some source which helps you see things from an outsider perspective, right? Somebody whom you can talk to. If I think of myself as a certain person, and then there is a actual person telling me by observing me, those can be very, very different pictures, right? My actions are driven by a lot of things that are going on in my mind. Just this morning, I was talking to my wife, and I was telling her that one of the things is, if I'm thinking of a song, let's take an example. If I'm thinking of a song, that tune is playing in my head, and I start tapping out that rhythm here, right? Would you sitting across the table by listening to that be able to figure out the song? Probably not. Right? Because in my mind, the tune is already playing, and I'm just tapping here to that tune. Right? It's very difficult for you to guess that. Right? So that is how I'm coming across to the external world. I'm just tapping. These are disjoint actions that are happening, and that's how word is viewing me. They can't listen to the tune that is playing in my mind, right? And for all you know, I might have composed that song on my own. Which so the thing is, especially if you think of if you're an original thinker, if you think of a new idea and whatnot, it's very important to get some sort of a perspective from an outsider who's just listening to these taps. You probably share with them that thought, that tune, and that's when they start to make sense.
You have a website, and I was going through it, and there was a blog, and I have taken this statement from that blog that unicorns are still a myth. I think you had written this long back, but I just wanted to know, your thoughts are still the same or they have changed?
Yeah, so I think this was, I think, back in 2016 or 15 somewhere. That was a phase, and I think the idea kind of struck me when I went to a NASSCOM conference, and one of the speakers actually said that we already have about 15 or 20 unicorns in the Indian startup space. Today, I think we've lost count, right? Which is a good thing, right? And but when I looked at it independently and I thought, okay, let me sort of process this a little bit. I somehow felt that the definition of a unicorn, which is like you are valued at $1 billion, and it typically is associated with a startup, right? Unless you are a listed company, right? You can quote whatever value you want to. You can pull a number out of thin air and pretty much claim that to be your valuation. I don't want to name names, but we've seen what has happened in EdTech, right? Now, when I looked at the story back then, it was very hard for me because I'm also a public markets investor, and I look at companies which are listed publicly and what kind of valuations they claim. It was very hard for me to even imagine how some of these companies, let's say if they were to list, would list at $1 billion valuation. So yes, back then it was true. The facts have changed today, right? We've come a long way from 2015, I think. It's almost 8-9 years now. And I think now we have some really solid businesses which are not just, been there for a long time, but have also proven their worth in public markets, right? They've gone public and they've listed at much, much higher valuations than just a unicorn. And I think that's changed. So yeah, the facts have changed, and I don't think that's a myth anymore. And I'm happy to be proven wrong. But back then, when I looked at it, it didn't seem like a lot of this was very true.
And looking back at your professional journey, so what is that one piece of advice you wish you had received when you were starting out?
Yeah, I think handling success, early success.
Okay.
I think that's one thing that if somebody can teach you early on, that would be very helpful. So I made a lot of mistakes because I somehow got early success in my career. My move into management roles actually happened by accident. I was personally not ready for it. Professionally also not ready for it. And somehow the situation was such at Amazon that they had to choose one of the engineers as the leader of the team, and they basically made me the manager. And while it was good because I went through a lot of learning, I also made a lot of mistakes. So I think that's something that people need to watch out for. If you get to taste success, especially early on when you've not seen the word, I think it can get into your head.
Okay.
Right? And it's very difficult to cut away the hubris and stay focused. So I think if there are high achievers, high performers, that's one thing that you need to watch out for.
And that's the piece of advice that you would like to share with us today as well?
No, I think I don't. I don't think honestly I have an advice for you. In fact, a lot of respect for you starting out as a founder on your own, and I think it takes a lot of will and courage to do this. I have personally not been able to do this, right? I admitted to everyone that this takes a different skin. And I don't have it. Even today, if you ask me, would you start out? My most likely answer is no.
Okay.
Right? I'm not cut out for that. I feel that I don't have it in me. So for somebody who's done that at a young age, who's doing this with all her vigor and energy, kudos to you. So just
Thank
keep
you.
going. I don't know what advice to give you, honestly.
Thank you. And Vishi, with this, we are going to end the episode. But last one thing that I would like to ask you. So, who is Vishi outside the work? No, you
Outside the
as a
work.
personality, you as a human being.
As a human being, I recently became father. So yeah,
Congratulations.
we had a baby boy, 4 months old now. So that's a role that I'm now playing. But yeah, as a person, I'd like to think of myself as somebody who's approachable, who's empathetic, who's probably ready to stick his neck out for people when they need it. And yeah, other than that, I love to eat. I think I told you. So if you know of good places to eat, I'm happy to try them out. But
Happy to share a list with you because I'm a foodie myself. So, and I keep on exploring the restaurants and the new places. So, yeah, happy to do that.
Sure.
Great, wonderful. Think we have come to an end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was an amazing conversation. Loved
you.
it. As we wrap up this episode with Vishwastam, we have gotten a glimpse into his incredible world of innovation, leadership, and growth. It's clear he's not just about the tech, he's about pushing boundaries, thinking big, and making a difference. Share it with someone who may find it useful. I'm your host, Ruby, signing off. Until next time, keep exploring the past, discussing the present, and preparing for the future.